Welcome to The Choice to Grow. I'm Scott Schwenk. Through these dialogues, we'll explore fresh perspectives and discover practical tools for navigating a thriving life that adds value wherever we are. I'll introduce you to innovators and creators from across our world who embody what it means to cultivate growing as a way of life. Let's prepare together. Take a deep breath in. Hold the breath briefly as you soften your shoulders and soften the soles of your feet and palms of your hands. Then exhale like you're releasing tension and setting down a heavy burden from every cell. Now let's dive in. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to The Choice to Grow. I'm very excited to introduce you to my next guest. Yet again, somebody that's a treasure to my heart, somebody I know, somebody I met several times. Alexander Love, with a whole bunch of letters after his name that I don't know how to say, is an acupuncturist, developmental coach, and facilitator. He is the director of curriculum development and a senior facilitator at the Newfield Network, which is an international coach training and personal development organization. Alexander is the developer of the Lumina process. It's a shadow work modality that integrates a Western understanding of the parts of the self and shadow with Eastern wisdom and integral theory. We'll get into all that. At the core of Alexander's work is his belief that the quality and the health of our future depend upon our willingness to come together and to deepen our capacity to live from wholeness individually and collectively. So if we can find the courage to embrace our painful experiences as individuals, life can become something that perpetually transforms us. As we transform, so does the world. And together, we can co-create a beautiful future. So without further ado, I'm just going to say a little bit more. I met Alexander just like I did Jeff Fitch at a couple of integral theory conferences. And integral theory, for those of you who are new to that, is really attributed to Ken Wilber, a brilliant thinker, but it really stands on the shoulders of a lot of people. The prolific writer and saint Sri Aurobindo, Jean Gebser, so many developmental psychologists. It's a way of looking at any moment and seeing many more perspectives of it in such a way that we're able to orient from a greater wholeness, like Alexander's pointing to. So we met at a couple of integral conferences and then small gatherings that were curated after that of later stage practitioners. And I just get along with Alexander like a house on fire. It's just easy. And I think that says a lot about who he is. He's found his way through establishing ease in his system and has been through some big life experiences. Puts him in a smaller category of people. Alexander, without further ado, I'm going to welcome you before I give the details away about your big experiences. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's really lovely to be here and lovely to be here with everybody, all the listeners.
So, Alexander, I kind of want to start with the Big Bang. And I don't mean the creation of the cosmos, but the inciting incident that has transformed so many people's lives who have gotten close to you. In fact, I tell this story when I'm recommending you as somebody to work with in your Lumina process. I've sent a few people that way who've all been blown away, which is that your father was murdered when you were in your early 20s. And I'm just going to let us all take a deep breath on that one, because that's, when you're hearing it for the first time, that's a lot to hear, even if you've heard of other people in that experience. That was many years ago. Even though grief does not have an expiration date on it, I'm willing to bet you can tell me that there's many moments when you miss your dad and there's a deep ache.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was 20, I was going to school in Boston for music, and I got a phone call that my father had been killed. And my father was a lawyer. He was he was a gentle, very intelligent, gentle man. He was into reading, philosophy. We had bookshelves that basically, instead of wallpaper, we had bookshelves. And he was also a Zen practitioner, a meditator. And yeah, and so I got the call that he had been murdered, and that began a 30-year journey so far, leading up to a couple years ago. I had the opportunity to meet with the man who killed him, and we had a 3-hour restorative justice dialogue. We've now probably had about 7 conversations. We're due to have another one coming up later this month, and continued our connection. I was about 20, he was about 18, 19. So we're very similar in age. And so it's been quite a beautiful experience to be able to meet him and to see what's possible when we can lean in to something deeper than just our behavior and the things that we do to each other.
When I'm telling that story to people, I bring in a detail that is one of the most sharp relief details, and it is so, I don't know what, it's just so transformative every time I consider it, which is, what was his first name again? Or no, actually, we don't, do we, do we say that? Can you say
Oh,
his
it's
name?
okay. Yeah, his name is Herbert. Yeah.
Okay, Herbert. So Herbert said to, after the first meeting with you, said to his helper, his social justice person, social worker, that there were 2 people in his life he felt loved by: his grandmother and you, Alexander.
Yeah.
Now, listeners, just pause and let that in for a moment. So, a young kid, probably who doesn't know anything from anything at some point, and probably has a world of trauma behind him, and is probably taking the money and thinking that's a big deal, does this act, ends somebody's life, has to live with that, goes to prison all these years, and then goes through some process, which is, I can only imagine how terrifying it is for both of you to have approached that meeting, and has the experience of being profoundly seen and loved by you.
Yeah. It's a gift for both of us. I always have felt connected with him in some way, um, because his choice. He made the choice to kill my dad. He was with a group of he was a group of 4 total. There was the mastermind who hired these were kids basically that he was hiring to do a job. They did jobs all the time. Um, he also lied to Herbert and told him that my dad was essentially in a gang. Now, my dad wouldn't even know how to find a gang. Now, Herbert didn't discover that he was lied to by a person that changed his diapers. The mastermind was not just some guy; he was someone who took care of Herbert when he was little. He discovered in our conversation that this person had lied to him, because despite Herbert being someone who was willing to pull a trigger and end someone's life, actually end 2 people's lives, it was my father and his assistant.
Oh, I didn't know that detail.
Yes, my father, it was my dad and his assistant. His assistant was my, let's see if we can sort this out. So my mother-in-law's daughter's fiance.
Mother-in-law's
So my dad's wife
daughter's fiance.
had
Yeah.
a daughter, and her daughter had a fiance, and that was my dad's assistant. So he took both of their lives. So despite the fact that he was willing to do that, he had his own moral code, which is that you don't hurt people that are innocent. And his boss, what he calls his old head, knew that he wouldn't do this if he thought my dad was innocent. So he told him that my dad was doing fraud. Was the language that Herbert used. So Herbert discovered that in our conversation, which was, it was a big deal for him because it meant that he crossed his own boundary, and he hurt innocent people.
How has he been able, from your observation, to reconcile? Because he didn't know that that was the case. He had no way of knowing at that time, seemingly, that was the case. Like, how have you seen him reconcile, if he has?
Well, what I've seen so far is that he felt betrayed. It was the only time I saw him get angry in our conversation. He wasn't angry with me. He showed up very gently. Now, this is someone who wears a crimson jumpsuit, which means you don't mess with this person. You know they have different colors for the jumpsuits to let you know that that jumpsuit and the fact that he's in a cell by himself, it means that he was one of the most violent people in the prison. Not now, but when he first got in there. And despite that, his demeanor is gentle. He's gentle. His eyes are gentle. His you can feel the heaviness of his heart and the presence of his being. And but when I mentioned this, it was the only time that I saw his energy come up in an angry way, that he felt betrayed by the person that changed his diapers. And this is, a big betrayal. It put him in prison for his in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Life in prison means life in prison.
Huh.
It's not 20 years like some places. You're there forever. He's never getting out.
Wow.
And so this was a betrayal, but also I've seen him process his experience, and he has some degree of forgiveness also, because he knows that, that's the way this, in his words, something like, that's who this person was, that he lied to people, he cheated people, he hired people to kill people. So I've seen him be angry. I've seen him also have some degree of forgiveness.
Hmm. That's interesting. The degree of forgiveness, you and I both, you much more granularly than I, study stages of development, ego development. And I'm just kind of like, wow, at what point of development does the capacity for forgiveness in that kind of a realm come online as a real possibility?
Well, I think the good news is that forgiveness can come online as soon as we're able to recognize that someone has a different perspective than us, which is quite early developmentally. I don't
So we
think
don't have to wait till fourth person
we
perspective.
don't have to wait. I think we can do it in second person perspective, which means I can, we see this in, with 8-year-olds, a friend hurts your feelings, or steals something, steals your cookie, or something like that. There's room. As soon as we can recognize that someone else is having a different experience than us, we can, at a very early stage, second person perspective, we can begin to take another perspective, which means there's room for forgiveness. And forgiveness is one of these words that we may use without defining. And so I just want to say that for me, forgiveness means that I'm no longer putting history in between us. I'm not wearing a set of colored glasses that's obfuscated by what has happened. I'm still aware of our history, but it's not in between us. It's not in the way. So I'm willing to see you right now. Instead of, when I look to see you, what I see are the things that occurred, in the past. I can recognize the pain of that, but then I'm willing to be here with you and say, what's here? For example, Herbert showed up with gentleness, with integrity, with intentionality. He was here to help. Primarily, came to help to our conversation to help me. He did also want to get some things off his own chest that would support his own healing. But the primary thing that brought him to the conversation, which, as you mentioned, it's scary. After, almost 30 years, you get a message that the son of the person you killed wants to talk to you. And you've been living in a prison that is very violent. This is, this is a shocking thing. And he agreed to it because he wanted to be of service, because he's fundamentally good. And I told him that he's fundamentally good. This is what happens when we don't put what happened in the past in between us.
Yeah.
Because if I look at him and I see what he did, I say, oh, you can't be good. If I look and see how he earned his nickname Razor, in prison when he first got in, you don't see a good person. But if there's a commitment to looking deeper to that and than that and seeing what's here right now, it's a deeply good person. I was the
Hmm.
first person that told him that he was good. He was already in his 40s.
So the meetings have continued. You said you're about to have a seventh meeting. What seems to be the driver at this point? Like in the beginning, you said there was a driver, or one of the drivers was helping you and getting some things off his chest. What does it seem like the drivers are on both your sides to continue these meetings?
Well, I mean, for me, emergence and transformation happens in relationship. Bottom line. I mean, we can come up with all sorts of models and maps about how to help people transform. And, those are all really important. But underneath that, it's all occurring within relationship. And I felt like one conversation was not sufficient. And so what happened is we got, because the kind of restorative justice dialogue, but because the kind of system we were a part of, you basically have one conversation and then it's done. I requested that I get permission for us to be able to meet just like you would meet anybody in prison. You just sign up, the way that a mother might meet their son in prison. You sign up and you can go. And so I got permission for us to do that. And for me, it's just to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. The other is that, um, I'm including some of this story in my book. And there were times when I didn't understand something that he was saying, or he would refer to something, but I didn't quite get it. And so it was also an opportunity to say, well, when you said this, like, tell me more about your grandmother. And when you said this, what did you mean? Like, what was that? Because some stuff would go by really quickly. And um, so primarily to stay in conversation, to deepen our connection. And then secondarily, just sort of help me with certain questions that I've had, and um, things like that.
Hmm. I've been, as you know, but the listeners don't, part of a group of people who, most of whom have been at these small curated late stage gatherings, or mostly late stage practitioners. And so you've been sharing quite generously along the way, like before you even went, asking us, what questions should I ask, and like this. And I'm curious where you're at now, about to have the seventh conversation, and time has passed, much time has passed since the first one. Like, what do you see has unfolded in you and your relationship to your relationships, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your father, your relationship with life?
Well, I think, to answer that question, for me, the answer to your question comes through, another question, which is, what is art? And what does it mean to make art? Because there's the experience of having the conversation with Herbert. There's the experience of, when I was 20, going to my father's funeral. There's the experience of the last 30 years. But then in this process of writing this book, there's a way in which I have to live into all of these things so much more fully. I've now returned to that funeral so many times. I've returned to the conversation, the first conversation that I've had with Herbert, so many times, not just to look at the specifics of what was said, but how to uh, allow these things to be written in a way that evokes beauty, that draws the beauty out. Because it's one thing to share a transcript, it's another thing to then how to craft that into a larger narrative that expresses the deeper beauty. So through the process of art making, through the written word, it's helped me re-explore, allowing the living history. For me, I like to make a distinction between the history and past, that they're not the same, that the past is something that has occurred. Living history is how that's still being, it has been enfolded, and it's rising in this moment. So I'm not trying to remember our conversation. I'm trying to lean deeply into how that conversation is still brewing in me, still moving me. And that allows my heart to break more fully. Because, when I'm having in a good way, when I'm having the conversation with Herbert, there's a lot of things going on, the first conversation, especially, I don't know who I'm going to encounter. I don't know who this person is. And there's all kinds of things that I'm navigating. But to be able to slowly go back, and find those moments as they're still living in me now, and really feel into these moments of connection, these moments of intimacy, I can touch them more and more fully each time. And then as that sort of cracks my heart open more, and there's this desire to take something maybe humanity or human beings would say, oh, that is horrible. I don't want to look at that. Well, how do I find the beauty in it so that we want to look at it? That the language, the story, the unfolding, the imagery is compelling enough that we stay to bring a phrase in from Donna Haraway, to stay with the trouble. Can we make it beautiful enough that we stay with the trouble long enough to fall into how it can move us? So,
There's a question that's occurring to me right now, which is like, I know you've told versions of the story along the way on different podcasts and to friends and like this. And at this moment, you've said a bunch of words and you've shared a lot of energy and emotion and experience for those who can sense it. And I'm curious, like, is there anything in you that would want to ask the listeners a question at this point in the story? Like, I'm the person you could actually ask a question to because I'm here.
yeah.
Is there anything you would be like, well, okay, Scott, so I said all this.
Yeah. So the question that I would ask is, where do you need to be in your direct experience to receive the fullness of this story from a place that can see that through the tragedy of it, there is an underlying intrinsic beauty that wants to be known? Where do you need to be in your body, in your direct experience, to start leaning into that?
For me, it's pretty low in my body. It's like in the belly without, but it includes the heart. And I need to stay really, not stay, but keep cultivating being really, really present. Like, notice any granular ways in which my attention wants to wander,
Yeah.
and care about the attunement with you and everybody in the story,
Yeah.
to see what's here, and to not have my, all, as they would say in other bodies of work, my already always way of listening to you.
Yeah.
Like, there's a way we already and always listen to stories about tragedy or somebody's loss
Yeah.
that are kind of on automatic. So I have to feel my body and be here and be really interested in discovery.
Yeah. The other question that comes up for me, for you, for the listeners, is where, if any, do you notice places that you want to create separation? In, for example, oh wow, that's amazing that that guy on the podcast is doing that thing, as if it's something that somebody else is capable of.
Yeah.
Where are those places where it's like, oh, I'm listening to a story of something amazing, but somehow not including yourself as the human being who could also do that?
And by do that, I find myself throughout the story including myself as, well, under what circumstances could I be the person that was misled and end somebody's life?
Right.
Like, what would I need to be told or hear
Yes.
that I would do an action that's so inconsistent with my past
Yeah.
and that is so inconsistent with my moral compass? Like, what would I have to believe?
Yeah.
That's one thing. Then also, like, if somebody I profoundly cared about, like my mother, had been murdered,
Yeah.
what would have to happen in my life for me to be able to be willing to go through a social justice process, to meet with the person, to be able to meet them as they are now, not put the past between us, and to discover this person? Like, what would have to happen in me?
Yeah.
These are the questions I'm asking myself as we sit
Yeah.
here together.
Yeah. So we share those questions
Yeah,
because, to be honest, the primary reason why I wanted to meet with Herbert, there were many reasons, but one of the main reasons was for everyone listening.
yeah,
There was, for me, there was already forgiveness walking into that conversation. I didn't come to that conversation hoping to find forgiveness. Remember, it's 30 years. I had a lot of time to work with this.
yeah.
I came to the conversation because I knew that this conversation was possible. I knew that other human beings had done conversations something like this before. And I wanted to have the conversation and then bring it to the world. And to be clear, this isn't just a way for Alexander to help the world. This is a way for Herbert to help the world.
That's right. Which is part of the beauty underneath the situation that's not so obvious at face value.
That's right.
Like,
Because
what
he's,
even just brings any one, two, three people to cross each other's path for any purpose? And am I only looking at the surface, like, oh, because we're at the same door of the grocery store? Well, there may be a lot more involved, giving everything that had to happen for us to actually be at that same point in time together.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm very attuned at this moment to the possibility that people are considering, like, the difference between a spiritual bypass or toxic positivity and finding the beauty in the seemingly terrible.
that's right. And so, one way to explore this, some language that I find helpful, is looking at the pre-tragic worldview, tragic worldview, and the post-tragic worldview. The pre-tragic worldview we often find in kids that have some degree of privilege or have parents that can sort of protect them from the realities of human violence, I guess you could say. So in pre-tragic worldview, there's kind of an innocence. In adults, we see this more in spiritual bypassing communities or in communities that will have a system set up like fake news so that when a tragedy happens, they can say, oh, those are just actors, which is a way for us to not have to feel the horror of what human beings can do, as well as we don't feel the implications of our own choices because that stuff didn't really happen. So I'm no longer implicated in the choices that I'm making with my vote or whatever. So we have these sort of two, there's many ways, but there's two ways that the pre-tragic view can show up in adults. Also innocence, but that's less common. Then you have the tragic worldview, which is one in which we allow our hearts to be um, moved and broken open by tragedy. But when we're in a tragic worldview perspective, typically what happens is we lose heart. We feel overwhelmed and uh, unable to know how to effectively respond. We see this commonly whenever a group of people has a president that gets elected that they wish wasn't elected. So depending on whatever side it is, in the U.S. we have these very sort of these sides. Whoever's president doesn't get elected, there's sort of a heart crushing tragedy, or we see wars that seem to go on forever. And from a tragic perspective, we take all that in, and it starts to weigh on us in such a way that we become ineffective or unable to act. Now, there are phases within a tragic perspective where then we do act. We say, this happened to me. I don't want this to happen to anyone else. I'm going to spend my entire life, preventing more school shootings. So we do see action, but inside of us, there's often a sense of wanting to collapse and how am I ever going to do anything about this? But many good actions do come from people responding to a tragic worldview. Now, a post-tragic worldview, it embraces those earlier those earlier perspectives. It embraces how each one of us has moments where we, watch a TV show and we zone out from the fact that there are wars that have not stopped, that there are people that don't have the luxury to just watch a TV show and numb out. So there's times where one particular individual, they go into a pre-tragic sort of territory. That same individual then has a moment where something hits them and they're like, their heart is overwhelmed. The post-tragic can embrace all of that, but it does one additional thing. It invites us into an anchor in wholeness, an unbroken dimension of being, a place within us that sees the intrinsic sacredness and meaning in all experiences. This doesn't mean we're creating meaning, like we're creating a story that makes sense. It's the felt sense of sacredness in horror, where we're willing to embrace the tragedy. So we're not bypassing it, but we don't collapse because this place within us is incapable of collapsing. It's only capable of saying what's next, of leaning in and discovering that all tragedy is a doorway into profound possibility.
All tragedy is a doorway into profound possibility.
That's right. And it doesn't mean we're like, oh, well, that's fine. Like, let the wars, everything's all good. It's not the bypass, everything's all good nonsense. It's a recognition of, oh, this is really deeply painful. And it's also a doorway. It's also a
Yeah.
doorway.
Yeah. The thing is not to bypass that pain. It's very easy, I think, for any of us, and I'm paying attention to this in my own world. I rarely at this age know more than 6 months without somebody in my life having some sort of somebody I know having like a health crisis, for example.
That's right.
And so am I letting myself feel fully without collapsing into, am I feeling it fully, or am I moving quicker than I'm noticing into making a meaning of sacredness?
Right. Exactly. Because what I'm describing is a quality of recognition from the heart. Yes, there can be a linguistic cognitive domain, but if we're only doing it that way, it's easy to bypass.
How would you find yourself in this moment pointing out what the heart is when you say heart? Because people may have their own idea of what heart means.
Yeah.
How are you holding that, looking from the heart, feeling, sensing from the heart?
Yeah. So experientially, my attention has dropped down into my heart center. So for me, there's a dropping down and touching into the heart center.
Is this in the midline of your body, or are we over at the physical organ?
This is midline. So you find the middle of your sternum, the middle of your chest, and find the middle of your head. And you go down from the top of your head, and then you go in towards your spine from the front, in towards the spine until those two places meet. You're at the very center, very center of that's the heart center. And so there's a sense of being in that location. But here, when we're talking about the heart, if we're bringing in some of the wisdom of Chinese medicine, we're not talking about an emotional territory. In Chinese medicine, if you're saying like, "Oh, you broke my heart," we're actually talking about a different part of our being. That's not technically the heart, even though we use that language in our culture. But the heart itself is deeper than that, and it's a place of presence. It's a place of presence. It's one of the few Chinese characters for the organs that doesn't have something indicating that it's flesh. So when you look at the spleen and the stomach, when you look at the small intestine, when you look at the bladder, they all have a character that's the same, which means, oh, this is a part of the body. The heart character doesn't have that. So we're talking about an immaterial location of presence. And if we were built like an avocado, which we are, skin, blood, bones, the outer part of the avocado, the mushy part, That's the blood. And then we have the seed of the avocado, our bones. Then we're starting to move closer towards that seed, the essence layer of being. And maybe even we go a little deeper than that into just a transpersonal knowing presence. And that deep essence of being and that knowing presence, those are unbreakable. They don't express separation. They are completely willing to embrace our experiences of separation. But they recognize that even the experience of separation is a feature of wholeness. That's where the post-tragic worldview comes from. So when our friend, for example, that you gave, if a friend has a health crisis, we're not like, oh, you're going to be fine. There's a deep feeling of the pain in that person. Maybe the pain that we experience as their close friend, we feel the humanity, but we also experience them as an unbroken expression of becoming, of cosmic becoming. They are deeply possible. And no matter what occurs in their experience, this is part of their living, learning, and unfolding. And so that's what I mean by the heart center.
I'm curious, listeners, what you're noticing that you're experiencing, like what you're feeling. I can share, because I can't hear you right now, listeners, but I can share, you can share in the comments, and I am curious. I feel such a lively awareness and energy in the center of my body, in the center of the heart center. The sensation of it reminds me of intense love.
Yeah.
Only without a particular object that it's directed towards.
And that's what we're talking about here. Is we're talking about a love that has no object, that's able to face a killer and love them. It's not because there's anything special about Alexander. There's nothing to do with that. It's this love that's bigger than any individual that we all have inside of us, that we all have around us. And in my experience, there's a sense, I guess this is where the word grace comes from. I mean, who in their right mind interacts with someone who has killed their father, tied him up, and shot him? Who would do that? No individual who's contracted around their own self sense would do that. But this love, it softens us. And it shows us what's possible. And it doesn't turn away from tragedy and doesn't turn away from horror.
I'm really with the word courage in its French etymology of heart with this conversation, this part of the conversation. Like, love is the force or the fuel of courage.
That's right. And, you know, for me, one of the things that's been really important, you know, Wilbur talks about the different faces of God, you know, as the language he uses. There's the first person God where you're sort of awakening to God as your first person perspective, like I am the one. And then you have the third face, which is like recognizing the sacred world, the whole cosmos as a expression of the one. But then we have this second face. This is the lover and the beloved. If those of you that are familiar with the poetry of Mirabai, it's very much this quality of being. And for me, you know, when my father died, my experience was that I was kind of going at it on my own.
Yeah.
You know, all of the adults were just as in shock as I was. I had already planned to move to Boulder. So I'm after the summer, when my father died, that I finished out the school year in Boston. And then I spent time in my hometown for the summer. After that, I went to Boulder, which was sort of this big shift in my entire life. And I'm all the way across the country. Everyone else is completely, their knees are broken. There's just so, so my dad was a beautiful man. People loved him. This was such a shock. And so for me, this posture of crying out, the sense of I don't know how to do this on my own. And in my book, one of the phrases that comes up is like I was looking for a world that hugged back,
Wow.
not just from humans. I was looking for like there's got to be something more that hugs me back. Ultimately, it was an intuition, uh, not a conscious intuition. It was a longing and yearning from feeling pain for this love that you're describing. To invite that relationship with a quality of being that erodes the places in us that say, I would never talk to Herbert. I would never reconcile with my brother or sister or mother or uncle or like whatever that is. This love, it erodes that in us, inviting the possibility that we might then be able to make some choices from the view of love, which is infinitely generous.
For years, when people would ask me, students would ask me to define the word grace, I would say, well, it's pretty indefinable. And the best thing I could say is that grace makes the impossible possible. And I've just had a pivot here with you where I actually want to say love makes the impossible possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think of the territory of grace. As you were speaking, it reminds me of a Chinese character that doesn't have an English translation. Um, I'll mispronounce it in Chinese, but it's Ling, Ling. And the character, what it shows is at the top of the character is like basically in three sections. The top section is like the canopy of heaven with 4 drops of rain, which means infinite drops of rain pouring. And then in the middle of the character, there's 3 squares. These squares it's the character for mouth. So there's 3 mouths that are open, receiving this rain. And at the very bottom of the character, you could say the earth, quote unquote, the earth part of the character, you have 2 female shamans doing a rain dance. And this character, what it's about is that we're engaging in ritual. We're engaging in and in modern terms, instead of the word ritual, we might use the word practice.
Hmm.
We're engaging in a kind of practice that makes it possible that we might open our mouths in such a way that we receive this nectar, this love that's pouring from heaven. And when I get a sense of that character, it reminds me of grace. It's sometimes grace is that practice of crying out, but then listening for the response, the call, and then the response.
There's is evocative for me when you describe the parts of the character, especially when you said 3 mouths. It immediately evoked there's a matrix of consciousness in the Hindu tantric worldview called Chinnamasta. And in tantric Buddhism, she's called Vajrayogini. And in the depiction of her with her kind of what's called anthropomorphic form, looking somewhat human-like, she has severed her own head off. There are 3 sprouts of blood, nectar, coming from her throat, one each into the mouths of her attendants, and then another stream into the mouth of her own severed off head. Now, those of you for whom very vivid iconography like this is new and challenging, this is not about somebody cutting their own head off to find grace physically. But I'm curious about the interpenetration or the interplay between the Chinese character and this pointing out of this imagery of becoming headless in order to receive the nourishment of the heavens or of the cosmos.
Right. And I think that, this happens for us in different ways. We can talk about this as a high attainment where someone's sort of sense of self begins to dissolve. And like, that's nice. But I think more often what happens
That's nice.
is, what I think more often what happens is we're brought to our knees.
Yeah.
This is where tragedy becomes a doorway, that we're brought to our knees in such a way that we recognize there's a recognition. I don't know how to go on doing what I've been doing, given who I already am. And when we are brought to our knees in that way, in my experience, it's quite painful, but it's also a gift in that it invites us to cry out. And if we cry out, but then pause and listen, one of the problems that we face, some humans face, is we cry out and we never stop yelling because the response is usually not the way we expected and it's quiet.
Mm.
So if we cry out and then we pause and listen, we're being worked on.
This pausing to listen is something that has been occupying my awareness a lot lately. I'm currently giving a course. And so when I'm giving a course, my attention is just going a lot deeper at like how people process, how people experience, how people make meaning. And one of the things that's been coming across my screen a lot in my quiet moments is this instruction that I didn't create, that prayer is the request. And there's other forms of request or prayer like affirmative prayer, but the prayer is the request and meditation is listening for the answer. And I've been thinking about this huge seeming influx of people presenting and saying they've been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, and the culture of distraction and how that plays out with the ability to listen to and receive the grace, receive the answer, receive the guidance, receive the nourishment. That's part one of my question. Part two is what you see as a practitioner about transforming that quality of being in mind that is being called ADHD into one that can be undistracted and focused enough to receive enough nectar to share it with the world.
Yeah. So, the good news is that with all of the distraction in the world, um, what I hear you inviting as something that we need, the ability to focus, the ability to concentrate, the ability to listen, those are trainable skills. And I think what we've done a lot of in our culture is we've trained distraction.
Mm.
We have created an environment where, you know, if you're watching a YouTube video and the YouTube video is an hour long, people orient that differently than if it's 30 seconds or 40 seconds or a minute and a half.
They put it on 2x.
Exactly. And so we have started to train ourselves to be distracted people. And yet at the same time, we are more and more disenchanted.
Mm.
There's a sense of meaninglessness because one of the things that requires a sense of enchantment, a sense of sensing the sacredness in the world, is depth training. And depth training requires a degree of concentration. Concentrating the mind helps us go either within more deeply or focusing on some larger territory more deeply. And so, the good news is that this is trainable. But it's a process of having the intention to learn how to concentrate and then learning the tools. Now, we can use some of the tools that have come from the ancients, which is the mind goes off, we bring it back. The mind goes off, we bring it back. People use mantras for this, people use all sorts of stuff. We also have a whole domain of working with the parts of the self that can really support us in learning how to concentrate. And
Mm.
sometimes it's much faster than traditional concentration practice because there are parts of us that are distracting us as a means to protect us
That's
from
right.
whatever they're afraid we're going to feel if we were still. And if we can build relationship with those protective parts and deepen trust, it's often a faster way for the system to calm down than to just focus the mind again, focus the mind again. That works too, but it's the long game for a lot of people.
As a practitioner of Chinese medicine, what do you see around, or do you need to weave in parts work to heal somebody who's interested in coming into greater focus, who says they present with a diagnosis of ADHD, for example?
Oh, I weave in parts work wherever I'm allowed,
Right on.
because for me, the psyche and soma are
One.
like two sides of the same cloth. And so, I mean, on the one hand, I do a lot of work with people that is non-local, and we're not doing acupuncture, we're just doing parts work. But when I'm seeing someone locally and we're doing acupuncture, my understanding is that, looking at the whole meridian system, which are like these channels that they talk about with acupuncture points, my understanding is that that system is working in conjunction with a mind that is distributed. This means that the mind isn't in the head. That the mind is in the head, it's in the chest, it's in the shoulders, it's in the ankles, it's in the heels. So that the way that you move in your body, the way that you use your heels, you use your heel to ground downward, and then you rock on your pad of you rock on your foot, and then the front pad of your foot you leap. That's an expression also of how the distributed mind concentrates into descent, transitions, and leaps. It's not just all happening up here where the brain is. So when I'm working with someone, I found that while acupuncture is deeply effective and profound, when the client is also working with their own interiority, we're working with the energetic system and their subjective inner landscape. It's far more profound and more importantly, sustaining. It goes beyond that session was a beautiful state experience, and then it sort of wore off, and now I'm back to who I was before. I saw that in my early practice and I didn't like it. And so I had to find other tools to support my clients to have sustained change, which is, I think, what we all want.
The founder of Network Spinal, which when we were kids was called Network Chiropractic, Donnie Epstein, there's a lot of papers done on his work, and he's distinguished it as the difference between restorative healing, which is what you described, like, okay, I'm back to what I was, or I'm back to some modicum of functioning, it's maybe not radiant, or reorganizational healing, which can incorporate trauma, difficulty, illness, and and the system with right support reorganizes into greater and greater coherency.
Yeah, that's right. And also, I find that with parts work, there's a degree of agency on the part of the client that doesn't exist when you come in and lay down and get needles put in you and then hope that you're going to be better after.
The do me approach.
Yeah, well, and it's natural, right? I mean, you get a massage, you're like, I want to lay down and
Yeah,
get a massage, and your state changes and things change, and it's good and helpful.
yeah.
But I found for some of the deeper sort of stuck places in us,
Yeah.
when the person learns tools that they can actively implement when they're not in the session, that's where I find the sustaining reorganizational aspect of it takes flight. So that really the session can be powerful, but ideally, what happens in between sessions is where the most powerful stuff happens. It might not be as like explosive, but that's where the nervous system gets rewired through practice and repetition and learning and deeper exploration. That's where the person becomes a different person, not from just a momentary experience of, wow, that's great. That's inspiring. It's helpful. It's life changing. But then how do we integrate that into the way we move into the
This
world?
is part of I feel, the invitation of developing concentration for the in between moments, the liminal spaces where so much is happening. Like
Yeah,
this habit of occupying one's attention relentlessly until we pass out in bed at night
right.
is to miss out on the wonder of life,
Yeah,
the wonder of life, the cultivation of concentration, not to make something happen in between spaces, but to just to be curious.
yeah. Well, it reminds me to use a sort of some Buddhist language. It's like, where are we taking refuge?
Yeah.
Are we taking refuge in TikTok? Or are we witnessing TikTok while taking refuge in that deeper love, those deeper dimensions of being? What are we committed to? And that's not going to be necessarily through our ideas about what we're committed to. What we're committed to is going to be evidenced by our how we move in the world, how we move our mind. So, to what degree am I taking refuge or committed to building that relationship with, we could say, the beloved with a capital B, that relationship with the big love? It doesn't mean that I have to block out the world, quite the contrary. But am I able to take refuge in these deeper dimensions of who we are, these unbroken dimensions of who we are, while also doing the things?
Yeah. Have you noticed any of your parts that are remaining in some degree of resistance to healing and forgiveness, whether it's related to Herbert or to anything else that is, left you with an imprint?
Well, I think there's two different questions there. There's related to Herbert and then related
Anything
to
else?
everything else that's made an imprint.
Yeah.
Um, Related to Herbert, um, not much. There
Hmm.
was, especially right before our conversation, there was a huge surge of parts that were like, dude, what the hell are you doing? Why would you put us into this?
And your field spoke that through this, at least to me, in the signal chat when you were asking. Like, it was a very different energetic. Like, our fields speak to everybody before we enter the room, right? And there was like, I was touched by the vulnerability that you were letting be there. And like, I was like, wow, I feel fear. I feel sadness. I feel grief. I want to hug him.
Mhm.
Carry on. I didn't want to interrupt. I just
Yeah,
wanted to add that.
no, it's okay. So, um, so there have been moments um, where that has come up. It was mostly a little bit before the conversation. And then I found that for about a month and a half after the conversation, uh, there was a lot of so there was a lot of things that sort of came up as a result, and I want to kind of give some context. The way that I understand kind of how sort of this kind of stuff, this question you're asking works, is that we come into contact with someone, and if there are untended seeds, we might call these we might call this karma. You can call it whatever you want, but if there's untended seeds, then that relationship is going to trigger that. So in typical language, we'd say, "Oh, I got triggered." I prefer to call it a karmic awakening. It's a process through which I come into contact with someone, and that dredges up all of these aspects of being that I didn't know were there or have not been fully embraced with love to the point that they come to fruition. So, with that as context, after our conversation, my body and being had a number of weeks of that. It was very painful, physically painful, and also psychologically painful, and just required patience and allowing that love to support all of these things to come to fruition.
Yeah.
What I found was that every time I would meet with him again, a little bit leading up to, and then the weeks following, again, there'd be this experience of this pain. Not all of it had narrative around it, but this pain, psychological and physical pain, would arise, and then it would release. And then came a point where that stopped happening for the most part. So, but to the other aspect of your question, of course, I'm still alive. So I have uh, relationships that I either have currently or relationships that I haven't yet had. Even if it's, someone looks at me funny at a store and I have a little trigger. It's not the magnitude of, talking to Herbert, but it's still an example of there's something in me that still expresses a little bit of separation.
Hmm.
And so that's the doorway right there. That little I like, trigger, it's kind of has a negative comment. I'm triggered by life. Life is triggering me. But a karmic awakening, well, damn, this is exciting. I'm at the
Sign
Best
me
Buy.
up.
Somebody cuts me off on my way to Best Buy and I start feeling like I'm from Jersey because I'm from Jersey. And I start feeling like I've got heat in my blood and I'm redheaded, which you probably can't tell, but I'm redheaded. All of those things are pointing to me a whole new sort of banquet of seeds that I can either act out and cause harm by expressing separation, or I can tend and allow that love to liberate them.
This is really good to hear for people, especially people who maybe relate to you as somebody, and even like my intro, as a quote late stage practitioner. And I know a number of which in the integral community and the stages community. And it's so refreshing to hear people who have access to these sixth and later person perspectives saying, I was being flown to the hospital and a young part of me that was traumatized by medical stuff came up, and I
Yeah.
was able to hold it with the support of my community. And like, yeah, we're in a body. Or my Trividya teacher who says, if somebody's in a body, they still have seeds or faults, is the way she put it. She didn't mean it in a pejorative sense, but if anybody's in a body, understand that they still have stuff to deal with. And I think many of us are still grappling with that because of the mythology of the way, particularly the Abrahamic traditions, or the ones who took control of the history, told us about the main figure of each of those three traditions as somehow perfect.
That's right. That's right. And, we have this myth of the enlightened one. That's one issue that we're contending with. Then we also have this other issue that late stage development must automatically equal enlightenment, which it doesn't. And
No.
so we have these ways that these are, if we don't parse this out really precisely, it's easy to just conflate the whole thing and be like, oh, well, they must be perfect or they must not have problems. When actually, if we're looking, you mentioned the six-person perspective, if we're looking at the six-person perspective, um, part of what's occurring there is their identification with who they are is beginning to enfold all of cosmic history, not conceptually, but experientially, which means that they are all of it, not standing on a perch somehow separate from it. But not only that, their sense of identity is not individual. So it's not like, oh, look at Mr. Six-person perspective over here who doesn't have problems and how they're looking at the world that does have problems. They are the world that has problems. But they're also recognizing that world from a different dimension of being that is also unbroken. So they are their neighbor who is, coming from a second person perspective or a third person perspective.
I want to repeat what you just said because it sounded like it may have cut off, and hopefully it made it. But they're coming to it from the perspective of what is unbroken.
They're
That
coming to it from the yeah. So in a six-person perspective, they're coming at things from a perspective that's unbroken. But to be clear, you can be earlier than six-person perspective and connect with unbroken wholeness. Their identity is a collective distributed identity. So it's not like they're here as an individual at the six-person perspective. They are all of the people that are all of the perspectives. There's not separation. But when we look through the sort of common ways of looking at development, we create separation like, oh, they're late stage. They must not have problems. Well, okay, but if anybody in the world has problems, they have problems.
right, right. It's good to open out the reality
Mhm.
so that each of us can take the next step where we are. You know.
Yeah.
Usually, I ask guests, when you hear the title of the show, "The Choice to Grow," what is that evoking for you in this moment? And we've been talking inside of it all along, but I am kind of curious just what spontaneously arises from you when you consider that. Like you hear the title, "The Choice to Grow." What in this moment does that actually invoke or
Yeah.
evoke?
So what comes up for me is that if we look at this in the context of our 13.7 billion year history, we, for most of that time, haven't had the choice to grow. We've been growing, but we've been doing so without self-reflectivity. Then, a couple 100,000 years ago, wherever we say humans began to come online, all of a sudden we have the birth of a new possibility, which is, um, you know, part of our deepest pain, which is the fact that we experience separation, and our deepest gift, which is that we can self-reflect. And so for the first time in, 13.7 billion years, all of a sudden we went from growing as the fundamental expression of cosmic evolution to having self-reflection that allows us to begin to make choice. Now, this doesn't mean that we're not going to grow just because we choose not to, but we have the choice to move towards something, to move away from something, to decide to eat all the potato chips and take the heroin and, fall asleep. We also have the choice to move towards something. And so to me, the choice to grow, it's an invitation into looking at this entire human realm. And that every step of the way, maybe aside from our very first, infant moments, but early on, we have the choice to consciously move in a direction out into the world, but also ask ourselves with that self-reflectivity, who am I? Why am I here? What am I going to do about it? And so to me, that's what it invokes. It's leaning us into this gift of the human realm, and it's also pointing us to this profound pain that came along with this gift, that now we can say, I don't know who I am. I don't like myself. All those kinds of things that come from self-reflection. So we get suffering, and then we also get self-reflective awakening, the possibility to awaken to who we are and know it, which is different than something without self-reflection, who it's a perfect expression of its nature, but it doesn't know it.
And then there we are back at concentration to actually become available to self-reflection.
Right, exactly.
Like if I'm distracted, I can't really self-reflect in any sort of a useful way.
Right, which is why, human beings find themselves in a place of disenchantment, because we have the capacity to know ourselves. There's a deep impulse of intrinsic positivity that wants us, that wants to express itself through us knowing ourselves. And then we get distracted, and you get distracted again. And there's an important pain associated with that dismissal of deep inquiry. That pain of, some people wear that shirt that says meh, the pain of everything is sort of blah. That's a pain that's trying to pull us, remind us that there's something deeper. And that pain, just like every era has its own shadow, its own breakdowns, its own issues, when that gets loud enough, it becomes a catalyst for a positive revolution. Now, when I say revolution, I'm not trying to be dramatic. It can just be a revolution within one's own heart, but sometimes we'll see in collectives where human beings say, you know what, enough. We need more. This isn't meeting the moment in the way that we want to meet the moment. It's not meeting our needs. And then we get an explosion of a new sort of collective exploration, a new moment of collective discovery.
It's a great segue into the question that I ask every guest. And it's predicated on the quote, one of my favorite quotes from Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who opened the Zen Center of San Francisco in the 60s. And he would say, death is certain, the time is not. What is the most important thing?
Yeah. So for me, there's two domains that, for me personally, I'm not suggesting everyone should adopt something like this, but for me personally, there's two questions that I carry with me. And, um, part of this is a gift from my father being killed. So when I was so young, um, I've been very acutely aware that my days are numbered. Sometimes people in their 20s don't think about that much. But when your dad is taken away, it becomes loud that there's no guarantee. Today, this conversation we're having, it could be the last thing that happens.
Mm.
So the question that comes up for me is, in the context of death, in the context of death's inevitability, there's two things that I care about. What can I leave behind? And what can I take with me? What I can leave behind is the legacy. It's the moments that I chose to love, even though there was a place in me that wanted to bite. It's the times when I accidentally bit and then apologized and took care of it. I mean, I have a 16-year-old. There's times when it's like after 10 and I get tired. So there's the legacy. That could be life's work. That could be writing books. That could be the conversations you have with your neighbor and you consciously tended to how you showed up in those conversations. Those are the moments that we choose to have conversations with the people that we don't like or that we feel hurt us. And we did the work to be able to lean in from a deeper place and have the conversations anyway. So that one domain of what do I leave behind? It's the domain of legacy. Am I leaving a trail of tears? Am I leaving the intrinsic positivity and generosity that's a deep feature of this love? And then the other side, what can I bring with me? There's only one thing I can bring with me, according to my understanding. I'm not meaning to, sometimes I get passionate. I'm not meaning to preach the truth. I'm just sharing passionately what's true for me. The only thing I can bring with me is the relationship that I've developed with the beloved, to use that language because we've been using it.
Yeah.
We could put it in any tradition. The relationship to being and becoming awakened awareness, to use like a Buddhist language. Whatever language we use, how much time am I spending in meditation and cultivating that relationship? Because when I go, I don't bring the body, I don't bring my legacy. I only bring that relationship. So that's kind of how I hold it.
Yeah. I really am vibrating with that. Like I feel that surge of love again. And also the curiosity. I don't know if you happen to know it offhand, but you've been bringing us along with the character, the Chinese character for things and how it's revelatory about a deeper understanding. And I'm wondering if the Chinese character for death tells us anything more about death.
I don't know that one.
Mm.
Sadly, as a Westerner with English as my first language, I've learned Chinese characters rather than learn the language the way we would learn a typical language. I've learned the characters like these gems. And some of them I know, some of them I don't.
Hmm. In Sanskrit, the script, the Devanagari script, I've been taught that each character actually is a yantra, a geometric, energetic form that transmits consciousness.
Yeah.
And it sounds like other ancient languages are
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah. And, the way that I would orient to the question relates to what we might call wisdom and compassion. That wisdom is the awakening to our true nature. That's what we bring with us. And then compassion is world facing. Compassion is the legacy that I leave behind, which, if we look at compassion more deeply, it's the willingness to experience the suffering of so-called other in myself or my location, and then embrace that with love so that there's an alchemy, there's an alchemization of that suffering into love. So to me, if we're looking at these two things of, what do I bring with me and what do I leave behind? One way to do that is to look at wisdom and compassion. Wisdom shows the character for the heart with a hand with a broom, and the broom is brushing away the obscurations that are in the way of recognizing our deep true nature. Compassion also has the character for the heart, but it shows these basically the silk, the character for silk, which are like these, they're like a chrysalis, like like these, like they're like these little circles strung together, like you could imagine like a cocoon. And then above that is the character for vegetation. And when you look at the character for vegetation with silk, it creates a kind of quality of being, like velvety. This velvety quality of love that is enveloping the suffering of humanity, so that we're transmuting those tears. We're transmuting all that pain. And
This
then
way of learning language is so much more helpful to me than Merriam-Webster.
Yeah, it's different. Words birth worlds. And so, and for me, Chinese language, it's not just like, oh, this cool thing that I learned. I mean, when I went into Chinese medicine school, I was lost. I was looking for how to help myself. And the Chinese characters and my teachers that taught me about them, it gave me a language for how to live. So I feel very close to these. Also, being someone who's dyslexic, a lot of things don't make sense to me the way like it's supposed to. These images, these symbols spoke to me in a language that I could relate to, and it helped me as sort of a guiding light. So I just wanted to give a little context there, that they're very precious to me, even though I don't come from that culture. It feels like they sort of took me under their wing, and the wisdom of the medicine took me under its wing and helped me.
Well, and that preciousness transmits. It's palpable for me, for sure, and I hope it's palpable for you listeners. Yeah. Alexander, this feels like a really great transition moment, and thank you with everything I have, with all the cells of my being and more. It's always a reward to just be with you, regardless of what happens. Like, I'm so feel free when I'm with you to be in discovery and drop agenda.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott. It's lovely being here with you and all your listeners.
So everybody, if you're new, what we do is we spend the last about 10 seconds or so together, just in stillness together, noticing whatever you're noticing about your experience. There's no right experience to have. So if you get quiet and like, what am I supposed to be feeling? Bring your attention to just feeling the entirety of your body and just letting your breath become easy and sweet. And we'll end in that way together, being together in stillness. Loving the episode? Click to follow, like, and share it as widely as possible. Want to go deeper with the choice to grow? Explore the show notes. You'll find links there for going deeper with our guests, as well as how to work with me in the work of waking up, growing up, cleaning up, and showing up. Thanks for listening. Can't wait to join you in the next episode.